She was sent instead of her sibling as a bride. But his little girl said, "God sent you after all." Now, let's dive into the story. The memory of Hartwell Manor was always painted in shades of gray and gold. The gray was the stone, cold and unyielding. The gold was the light that fell through the grand windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced like forgotten dreams. And in the heart of that house were two sisters, as different as the moon and the sun. A delicate, skipping music box melody plays, then grinds to a halt with a crunch of broken gears. Isabella Hartwell, Bella, was 8 years old, a creature of light and delicate sorrow. She sighed, a sound as soft as a falling petal. Bella, voiced like a tiny bell. "It's not working, Sera. The dancer won't spin." On the floor, surrounded by tools more suited to a clockmaker than a young lady, was her sister. Seraphina. Sera was 10. Where Bella was willowy, Sera was sturdy. Where Bella saw magic, Sera saw mechanics. A tiny metal screwdriver tinkers. Sera, voice practical, patient. Patience, Bella. Gears are like puzzles. You can't force them. You have to understand them. Sera's small, capable hands worked with a precision that belied her age. She was mending what was broken, a role that would define her life. But the piece was shattered by a sound that always made both girls flinch, the firm, heavy tread of their father. A door opens, followed by heavy footsteps on a polished floor. "Father," voice booming cold. "Isabella, stop fiddling with that trash." Posture. A lady is always composed. Bella immediately straightened, her small hands clasped. Their father's gaze, a thing of ice and judgment, then fell upon Sera. "Father." Seraphina. Off the floor. "You look like a scullery maid. What will people think?" Sera scrambled up, hiding the broken music box behind her back. The favoritism was a language they were all fluent in. For Bella, criticism of her posture. For Sera, criticism of her very essence. The gold light of the room suddenly felt cold. The piano melody becomes darker, more tense, transitioning to the present day. 15 years later, the gold was gone. The Hartwell fortune had bled away, leaving only the gray, the cold, and the crushing weight of debt. The grand drawing room was now a chamber of quiet desperation. The frantic rustle of paper, a soft sob. Bella, now 23 and more beautiful than ever, was a portrait of despair. A single, perfect tear traced a path down her cheek. In her hand, she clutched a letter. Bella, voice trembling with panic. "I can't do it, Sera. I simply can't. Traveling to the wilds of Colorado? Marrying a man I've never met? A rancher? He's probably coarse and smells of cattle." Seraphina, 25, stood by the large oak desk. Her dress was neat but worn. Before her lay the enemy, ledger books filled with columns of red ink. She was the general in a war they were losing. Sera, calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. His letters were perfectly literate, Bella, and his offer is the only thing standing between us and the debtor's prison. She picked up another piece of paper, the latest letter from Mr. Caelan Grayson. She read aloud, her voice devoid of sentiment. Sera, he is a widower. He requires a bride of good breeding and a gentle disposition to serve as a mother to his young daughter. He's describing you, Bella. To the letter. Bella, whispering, horrified, "But I don't love him. I love Arthur." The name hung in the air. Arthur, the young painter with no prospects. The final, romantic rebellion against their fate. Sera, voice sharpening, the steel showing. "Arthur has no money, Bella. Father saw to that before he died, leaving us with nothing but his name and his debts. This train ticket is our only option." Sera slams the ledger shut. The sound echoes in the quiet room. Bella's muffled sobs, the nervous pacing of their mother. The argument had moved to the grand foyer, a space that now seemed to mock them with its empty grandeur. Bella was collapsed on the bottom step of the staircase, sobbing as if her heart would break. Their mother wrung her hands, a portrait of helpless anxiety. "Mother," voice fluttering. "She's too fragile, Seraphina. She'll wilt out there. The sun, the hard work, it will destroy her. What are we to do?" Sera stood perfectly still, holding the train ticket to Colorado. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like it held the weight of all their futures. She looked at her sister, the beautiful, delicate girl who had been raised for a life of ease that would never come. She looked at her mother, who had never learned to be strong. A dramatic pause. The music swells slightly. And in that moment, Seraphina Hartwell made a decision. It was not a decision of passion, but of pure, unflinching pragmatism. The same logic she had used to fix the music box all those years ago. Sera, voice quiet but absolute. Then I will go. Mother, speechless. You? But Mr. Grayson is expecting Isabella. He has her portrait. He will be expecting a beauty. Sera, he is expecting a solution to his problem. A woman who can manage a household. A woman who can be a mother. I can do those things. Bella can only be a wife. I will go in her place. The loud, hissing steam of a train engine. The clamor of the station fading as the train departs. The world was immense. That was Sera's first thought as the train pulled away, leaving her alone on a dusty platform at the edge of the wilderness. The air smelled of pine and earth, a stark contrast to the damp stone of home. She wore Bella's best dress, a confection of blue silk that was too fine for this place and too tight in the shoulders. She felt like a fraud in her own skin. Bootsteps approached, slow and deliberate. And then she saw him. A tall, broad-shouldered man emerged from the shadows of the station house. Caelan Grayson. He was older than she'd imagined, his face weathered by sun and wind. But it was his eyes that struck her. They were the color of a winter sky, and they held a deep, permanent sorrow. In his hand, he held a small, painted miniature of Bella. A beat of silence, broken only by the wind. His gaze moved from the perfect, smiling image in the portrait to Sera's face. A face marked by intelligence and resolve, but not by conventional beauty. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Caelan, voice low, flat, and devoid of warmth. You are not Isabella Hartwell. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Sera. She straightens her spine, meeting his gaze. No, I am her sister, Seraphina. She delivered the lie she had practiced, the words tasting like ash. Sera. Isabella was taken ill, quite suddenly. The family did not wish to disappoint you. I have come in her stead. Caelan Grayson said nothing. His jaw tightened. The disappointment in his eyes was a physical force. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't smile. He simply took her single valise, his knuckles white, and turned toward a waiting wagon. The creak of wagon wheels, the steady clip-clop of horse hooves on a dirt road. The ride was a silent, jarring journey into the unknown. Sera sat rigidly on the wooden seat, the stunning mountain scenery lost on her. Every bump in the road felt like a judgment. She had sacrificed her old life, only to be met with a rejection so profound it was silent. He had wanted a delicate ornament, a reminder of a civilized world. He had been sent, instead, a replacement part, sturdy, functional, and utterly unwanted. As the wagon climbed higher into the hills, Sera Hartwell allowed herself one terrifying thought. What if the life she had come to save was the very one she was about to ruin? The wagon will hit a particularly deep rut, jolting the passengers. A crow caws in the distance. The journey ended not with a welcome, but with a cessation of movement. The wagon rolled to a stop before a house that stood as silent and imposing as the man who drove the wagon. It was a sturdy structure of timber and hope, but the hope seemed to have bled out of it long ago, leaving only a shell. Caelan, voice flat, as if reading from a manual. This is it. The house rules are simple. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on some point beyond the barn, as if he could already feel the pull of the work that waited there. The work that was clearly more welcoming than the woman he'd been sent. Caelan, my daughter, Lily, is not to be disturbed. Her room is upstairs, first on the right. You will take the room at the end of the hall. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. Don't be late. And with that, he was gone. His boots crunched on the gravel, then faded as he disappeared into the dark mouth of the barn. He hadn't offered to help her down, hadn't shown her the way. He had simply delivered his terms and departed, leaving Seraphina standing by the wagon, her valise at her feet, a stranger on a foreign shore. A heavy wooden door opening into a silent house, then closing with a firm thud. The inside of the house was a reflection of the man, clean, orderly, and bitterly cold. It was a monument to function, devoid of any frivolity. There were no curtains softening the windows, no rugs warming the floors, no portraits on the walls. It was a house in mourning, and the grief had frozen everything in place. Sera's footsteps echo on bare floorboards as she explores. Sera found her room at the end of the hall. It was a small, square space containing a narrow bed, a plain washstand, and a single window looking out toward the relentless mountains. It wasn't a room, it was a cell. As she unpacked her meager belongings, her fingers brushed against the one piece of home she had brought, the little music box. She placed it on the bedside table, a tiny promise of melody in a world of silence. Determined to be useful, Sera ventured into the kitchen. She would make dinner. It was a task she could understand, a problem she could solve with flour and salt. But the stove was a stubborn beast, the ingredients unfamiliar. The bread she attempted turned out dense and scorched at the edges. The stew was watery. She was setting the dismal meal on the table when Caelan returned. He washed his hands at the basin, sat down, and ate. He didn't compliment the food. He didn't complain about it. He simply consumed it, his eyes fixed on the empty space in the middle of the table. The silence was a physical presence, a third person in the room, sucking the air and the warmth from it. And then a tiny sound, a whisper of movement from the doorway. Sera looked up. There, half hidden in the shadows, stood a little girl. She was clutching a rag doll, so worn its features had faded into a blur of cloth. She had her father's wintry eyes, but in them swam a loneliness so profound it stole Sera's breath. "Lily," a voice like a ghost, barely audible. "Are you the new mama?" Before Sera could form a word, before she could offer a smile, Caelan was on his feet. His chair screeched against the floor, a sound of pure violence in the quiet room. "Caelan," voice sharp, a whip crack of command. "Lily, back to your room. Now." The little girl flinched as if struck and vanished back into the darkness of the hall. Caelan turned his gaze on Sera, and the cold in his eyes was colder than any mountain wind. "Caelan, I said she is not to be disturbed. That includes you." He turned and walked out, leaving Sera alone with the congealing stew and the crushing understanding of her situation. She was not a bride. She was not even a guest. She was an intruder. That night, Sera lay in the unfamiliar dark, the weight of the silence pressing down on her. This was not the quiet of the English countryside. This was a vast, swallowing silence, broken only by the sounds of a world that was wild and utterly indifferent to her existence. And then she heard it. Another sound, small and human. A soft, muffled crying. It was Lily. The sound was a thread of pure sorrow, weaving its way under the door and wrapping itself around Sera's heart. Caelan's command echoed in her mind. She is not to be disturbed. But how could she not be disturbed? How could anyone hear that sound and not be moved? Sera slipped out of her room and stood in the dark hallway. The crying was coming from behind the first door on the right. She didn't open it. She didn't speak. She knew that to barge in would be to betray the little trust she hadn't even earned. Instead, she did the only thing she could think to do. She sat down on the hard wooden floor, her back against the wall beside Lily's door. She didn't make a sound. She simply sat there, a silent vigil in the dark. A presence, a witness to the child's grief. Slowly, gradually the crying subsided. It was as if the simple, silent knowledge that she was not alone in the dark was enough to comfort the child. When only the sound of peaceful breathing came from the room, Sera finally rose, her body stiff, and returned to her own cold bed. She had not broken the rule, but she had bent it, and in the bending, she had found a purpose. He might not want a wife, but that little girl, lost in the shadows, needed something. Someone. And for the first time since she'd stepped off the train, Seraphina Hartwell felt a flicker of something that wasn't despair. It was resolve. Dawn broke over the Grayson Ranch, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. But inside the house, the gray stillness remained. A week had passed. Each day a carbon copy of the last. Silent meals, Caelan's absence, and the haunting echo of a child's loneliness. Seraphina moved through the routines like a ghost, tidying rooms that were already spotless, her spirit withering in the silence. The squeak of a pump handle, water splashing into a bucket. Her one rebellion, her one source of solace, was a neglected kitchen garden she had discovered behind the house. It was a tangle of weeds, but beneath the chaos, she found the stubborn remains of herbs and vegetables. With hands that ached from unaccustomed labor, she began to clear the beds, to nurture life back into the barren soil. The soft crunch of soil being turned with a trowel. And from an upstairs window, a silent watcher followed her every move. Lily. Every day, the little girl would appear at the glass, a small, pale face framed by curls, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. One afternoon, driven by a courage she didn't know she possessed, Sera was in the kitchen attempting a pie. The crust was proving to be a formidable opponent. She was flour up to her elbows when a small shadow fell across the doorway. A faint footstep on the kitchen threshold. Lily, voice tentative, soft as a mouse. What are you making? Sera did not turn around quickly. She did not want to startle the fragile creature. Sera, keeping her voice light, conversational. An apple pie. Or at least, I hope it will be. The apples are being very stubborn. They keep rolling away. Lily, my mama used to make apple pie. Sera stilled. This was the first time the child had spoken of her mother. Slowly, Sera turned, offering a small, gentle smile, the kind one might give to a frightened animal. Sera, did she? Well then, you are the expert. Perhaps you can tell me if I'm doing it right. Should the cinnamon go in now, or later? It was a gamble, an invitation. For a long moment, Lily just stared, her doll clutched tightly to her chest. Then, ever so slowly, she took one step into the room, then another. The distance between them, which had felt like a mile, began to shrink. The sound of the back door opening and closing firmly. Heavy, booted footsteps. The moment shattered. Caelan stood in the doorway, his frame blocking the light. His eyes swept from the flower-dusted scene to his daughter, who had frozen mid-step. A storm gathered on his face. Caelan. Lily. I've told you. Sera. Her voice cuts through, calm but firm. She is not disturbing me. She is helping me. Caelan's gaze snapped to Sera, shock erasing the anger for a brief second. No one contradicted him. Caelan. She belongs upstairs. Sera. She belongs where she's not afraid to speak. The air crackled. Lily, sensing the tension, fled from the room. But the line had been drawn. Sera had stood her ground. The agitated snort of a horse, the stomping of hooves on hard earth. Later that day, Sera took a canteen of water out to the corral where Caelan was struggling with a magnificent, terrified chestnut mare. The horse was rearing, its eyes white with fear, while Caelan tried to muscle it into submission with brute force. Sera, approaching the fence. I brought you water. Caelan, irritated, not looking at her. I don't need help. Sera, leaning on the fence rail. Clearly you do. That horse isn't being difficult. It's terrified of you. You're all force, no patience. Caelan stopped, turning to face her. The sun was behind her, and for a moment, he wasn't looking at the replacement bride, but at a woman with clear, unflinching eyes who was not afraid to name the truth. Sera, I may not be the bride you ordered, Mr. Grayson, but I am here, and I am capable. You could try speaking to me instead of through me. This silence, it's a weight this house cannot bear much longer. She didn't wait for a reply. She set the canteen on the fence post and walked back to the house, her back straight, leaving him alone with the frightened horse and the echo of her words. Night sounds, the mournful call of a coyote in the distance. That night, the familiar sound came again, the soft, muffled crying from Lily's room. But this time, Sera did not hesitate. She rose and walked directly to the child's door. Yet she did not enter. Remembering the fear in Lily's eyes that afternoon, she knew trust could not be forced. So she did something else. She sat down on the hard wooden floor in the hallway, her back against the wall beside Lily's door. And she began to hum. It was the same soft, wordless lullaby she had hummed to Bella all those years ago when she was frightened. Sera's gentle humming, a simple, soothing melody. Inside the room, the crying hiccuped, then softened. Sera kept humming. After a few minutes, she heard the soft pad of little feet, and the door creaked open just a crack. A single, tear-filled eye peered out. Sera didn't stop humming. She didn't reach out. She just sat, a steady, calming presence in the dark. The door opened a little wider. Then, a small, warm hand slipped into hers. Lily sat down on the floor beside her, leaning her head against Sera's arm. No words were spoken. None were needed. The quiet, even sound of a child's breathing as she falls asleep. Sera did not know how long they sat there. But when the child's breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep, she carefully lifted her and carried her back to bed. As she turned to leave, she saw him. Caelan was standing at the end of the hall, shrouded in shadow. He had seen it all. The stern mask he always wore was gone. In its place was a look of profound, bewildered vulnerability. He didn't speak. He didn't scold. He simply looked at the woman who had quieted his daughter's nightmares, and then he turned and disappeared into the darkness. The first crack in the ice had appeared, and through it, a sliver of light began to shine. The change in the air was palpable. It was a thick, heavy silence that fell over the ranch, the kind that makes animals restless and men glance nervously at the sky. The brilliant blue was swallowed by a rolling, bruised purple, and the wind carried a sharp, metallic tang of ozone. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath. The frantic whinny of a horse from the corral. The sound of men shouting, hurried and tense. Caelan burst into the house, his face a mask of grim urgency. He moved with a purpose Sera had never seen, grabbing a heavy oilskin coat. Caelan, voice clipped all business. Get in the house and bolt the shutters. Storm's coming. A bad one. Don't open the door for anything. Sera, what about you? Caelan, already heading for the door. The cattle are in the low pasture. If the creek swells, they'll drown. We have to move them. Just stay inside. Keep Lily calm. And then he was gone, the door slamming shut behind him, leaving Sera alone with the mounting dread. The first drops of rain began to fall, slow and fat, hitting the roof like warning shots. Rain begins to patter, then quickly escalates to a deafening roar against the roof and windows. Within minutes, the storm was upon them in all its fury. It wasn't just rain, it was a deluge, a waterfall from the sky. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the shutters Sera had just secured. The world outside vanished behind a wall of gray water. Lily, trembling voice, clinging to Sera. Papa! Papa's out there. Sera, holding the child close, her voice steady despite the fear in her own heart. Your papa is the strongest man I know. He knows this land better than anyone. He'll be fine. He'll be fine. But as the hours dragged on, and the storm showed no sign of relenting, Sera's assurances began to feel hollow. The fire in the hearth seemed a feeble defense against the primal rage outside. Suddenly, a sound cut through the storm's cacophony that was far more terrifying than thunder. A frantic, pounding fist on the heavy wooden door. Sera rushed to the door, unbolting it against Caelan's orders. It was the foreman, Jed. He was soaked to the bone, his face ashen, a gash on his forehead bleeding freely, diluted by the rain. Jed, gasping for breath. It's the boss. His horse spooked on the ridge, through him, his legs pinned under a fallen limb down in the creek gully. The water's rising fast. We can't budge it. A cold clarity washed over Sera, colder than the rain. Fear was a luxury she could not afford. Sera, to Lily, her voice firm and calm. Lily, listen to me. Stay here. Do not open this door for anyone but me or your father. Do you understand? The little girl, wide-eyed with terror, nodded. Without another word, Sera grabbed the lantern, lit it, and snatched a coil of rope and a medical kit from shelf. Sera, to Jed, show me. The howling wind and lashing rain as Sera steps out into the storm. The door bolts shut behind her. The world outside was a nightmare of mud and wind. The lantern's flame guttered wildly, casting frantic, dancing shadows. They half ran, half slid down the slick path toward the creek. The gentle stream was now a raging, coffee-brown torrent chewing at its banks. And there he was. Caelan was trapped up to his waist in the churning water, his face contorted in pain, his leg pinned mercilessly by a thick, waterlogged branch. The water was rising, lapping at his chest. Caelan, voice strained, shouting over the roar. Get back. The bank could go. Get back to the house. Sera, ignoring him, her mind racing, assessing. Jed, we need leverage. Find a branch, a strong one, to use as a pry bar. She waded into the icy water without hesitation. The current pulled at her skirts, threatening to drag her down. She focused on Caelan's leg, her fingers probing beneath the water, feeling the grotesque angle of the break. Sera, calling to Caelan, her voice cutting through his pain. Look at me, Caelan. This is going to hurt, but I need you to push when Jed lifts. Do you understand? Their eyes met. In his, she saw not just pain, but a flicker of stunned disbelief. This woman, this stranger he had rejected, was standing in a flood, commanding him, saving him. Jed found a sturdy branch and wedged it under the limb. Jed, on three. 1, 2, 3. A grunt of immense effort. The groan of wood, a sharp, pained cry from Caelan as the limb shifts. The branch lifted just enough. Sera, with a strength she didn't know she possessed, pulled Caelan free. He collapsed against her, his weight almost sending them both under. Together, she and Jed dragged him up the slippery bank, away from the hungry water. Heavy, labored breathing, the relentless pour of rain. On solid ground, Sera worked quickly. Using the rope and a piece of splintered wood from the branch, she fashioned a rough but effective splint around his leg. Her hands were steady, her movements sure. She was no longer the unwanted proxy bride. She was a force of nature, meeting the storm with a storm of her own will. Caelan watched her through a haze of agony and exhaustion. He saw the determined set of her jaw, the focused intensity in her eyes, the way her wet hair clung to her face. He saw the woman she truly was. And in that moment, the last of his resistance shattered. The journey back to the house was a slow, agonizing trek through the mire. But as they finally stumbled through the door, into the warmth and the light, and saw Lily's tear-streaked face, something had fundamentally shifted. He was no longer her captor, and she was no longer his prisoner. They were survivors, and the storm that had threatened to destroy them had, instead, washed away the first layer of walls between them. In the days that followed the storm, a new quiet settled over the Grayson Ranch. It was not the brittle, hostile silence of before, but a quiet of convalescence, of breaths drawn deep and easy. The world outside was washed clean, and inside, the air itself seemed to have softened. Caelan was confined to the bed in his room, a room Sera had never before entered. It was as stark and functional as the rest of the house, but now it held the scent of brewing tea and the faint, clean smell of the poultice she applied to his swollen leg. The gentle clink of a spoon against a ceramic bowl. Sera moved about the room with a quiet efficiency, adjusting his pillows, bringing him meals. The hostility between them had vanished, replaced by a weary, cautious truce. The pain had humbled him, and her competence had commanded his respect. Caelan, his voice is rough, but softer than before. You saved my life. Sera, not looking up from stirring a cup of broth. It was the practical thing to do. The ranch needs its master. Lily needs her father. She handed him the cup. Their fingers brushed. It was the briefest of contacts, but it was the first that wasn't born of necessity or accident. A faint flush rose on Sera's cheeks. Caelan, Lily, she seems lighter. Since you arrived. She hums that tune now. The one you hummed. Sera looked at him, truly surprised. She hadn't realized he'd been listening. Sera, she's a lonely child. She just needed someone to see her, to listen. Caelan's gaze dropped to the wool blanket covering his legs. A shadow of profound guilt passed over his features. Caelan, her mother, Eliza, she was the light in this house. She could make anyone smile. After she died, I thought I could protect Lily by building walls, by keeping the world out. I thought keeping her quiet was keeping her safe. I was wrong. The name, Eliza, hung in the air between them. It was no longer a ghost to be feared, but a memory to be acknowledged. It was the first time he had spoken of his late wife, and in doing so, he handed Sera a key to the fortress of his grief. A slow thaw began, as steady and inevitable as the spring melt. Sera began reading aloud in the parlor each evening, stories of adventure from a book she found on a dusty shelf. Lily would curl up on the rug, enraptured, and from his armchair, his leg propped up, Caelan would listen, his eyes closed, not in dismissal, but in absorption. The sound of a voice filling the house was a balm. The rustle of book pages turning. Lily's soft, delighted gasp at an exciting part of the story. In the kitchen, Sera and Lily baked. The air filled with a warm, sweet scent of cinnamon and sugar. There was laughter, tentative at first, then freer, mingling with the sound of clattering bowls. A child's giggle, the sound of dough being kneaded. When Caelan was well enough to sit at the desk, he showed Sera the ranch's accounts. Their heads would bend together over the ledger, his finger tracing a column of numbers, her brow furrowed in concentration as she asked thoughtful questions. It was no longer his ranch, but a puzzle they were solving together. The scratch of a pen on paper. A low, murmured conversation about crop rotation. And smiles. Small, tentative smiles would pass between them. Across the dinner table, when a joke was shared, from across the room, when Lily did something endearing. They were like the first green shoots pushing through the thawing ground. One night, after the house was quiet, Sera sat on her bed. In her hands was the little music box. She had found the final, tiny gear that was needed. With a deep breath, she wound the key and lifted the lid. The tiny, delicate dancer spun, perfectly balanced. A sweet, clear melody filled the small room. The same melody that had been broken for 15 years. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Sera's face. She had mended it. She had fixed what was broken. Unbeknownst to her, Caelan stood just outside her door, leaning on his crutch. He had been on his way to bed when the sound stopped him. He listened to the fragile, beautiful music drifting into the hall. He didn't see the woman who had been sent as a poor substitute. He saw the woman who had brought music back into his silent world. The woman who had mended not just a toy, but a piece of his broken family. He did not knock. He did not speak. He simply stood there in the dark hallway, and for the first time in years, he felt not the heavy weight of loss, but the fragile, terrifying warmth of hope. The sunlight streaming through the attic window was thick with dust motes, like golden pollen suspended in time. Caelan, leaning heavily on his crutch, led Sera to a small, brass-bound trunk tucked beneath the eaves. It was the only thing in the sparse attic that looked like it held a secret. Caelan. His voice is quiet, reverent. I think it's time you saw. He knelt with a grunt of effort, undid the clasps, and lifted the lid. Inside, carefully wrapped in a soft woolen blanket, was a rectangular object. He lifted it out, and, with a tenderness Sera had never seen in his work-roughened hands, he unwrapped it. It was a portrait, not a grand, formal painting, but a small, intimate watercolor. The woman, Eliza, was not a stunning, classic beauty like Bella. Her beauty was different. It was in the warmth of her smile, the kindness in her eyes that were unmistakably Lily's. She looked gentle, happy. Caelan. I loved her with everything I had. When I lost her, I thought I could replace her. Find another gentle soul to fill the void. I was a fool. He traced the edge of the frame, his gaze lost in the memory. Caelan. I didn't want a replacement. I wanted a transaction. To order a mother like you'd order a new plow. I thought if I found someone who looked the part, who had the right breeding, the pain would stop. I am sorry, Seraphina, for my coldness, for my blindness, for everything. Sera looked from the portrait of the warm, gentle woman to the face of the man whose grief had made him so hard. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. His coldness wasn't just for her. It was for the impossible situation he had created for himself. He had tried to buy a feeling. Sera, you wanted Bella because she looked like the idea of a lady. The picture of grace you thought would fix things. But I am here, and I am not a transaction. Caelan. He finally looks at her, his eyes clear. "No, you're not." He reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, and took her hand. His grip was firm, warm, real. It was not the brush of accident, but a conscious choice. A connection. The gentle call of a meadowlark from outside. The sound of the wind softening. Later, as the sun began to dip below the mountains, painting the sky in fiery shades, they sat together on the porch steps. Lily was chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk, her laughter a bright, sparkling thing in the quiet evening. Caelan, the man who wrote those letters, he was drowning. I was so focused on what I had lost, I didn't know what I needed. I only knew the shape of the hole she left behind. I tried to find another piece that was exactly the same. Sera. And now, Caelan turned to look at her. The last of the sunset lit her face, highlighting the strength in her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet patience that had weathered his storm. Caelan looks at her, his eyes clear. Now I see that the hole isn't there to be filled with a copy. It's there to make space for something new, something different. Now, I see what I have found. His words were simple, but they held the weight of a vow. In the meadow, Lily caught a firefly, her face illuminated with wonder. The rustle of an envelope, the soft crackle of paper being unfolded. The next day, a letter arrived from back east. Sera's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. It was from her mother. "My dear Seraphina, I hope this letter finds you well. Forgive my silence. I write with news that will surely surprise you. Bella has married her Arthur." Sera read on. The debt had been settled by a distant, unexpected inheritance from a forgotten relative. Bella was happy. Her mother was comfortable. The crisis that had launched Sera on this journey was over. The anchor line to her old life had been severed. She felt a pang, not of jealousy, but of a quiet, profound finality. The path behind her had vanished. There was no going back. She looked out the window. Caelan was teaching Lily how to hold a kitten without frightening it, his large hands gentle around her small ones. This rugged, beautiful, healing land. This man slowly learning to love again. This child who had crept into the deepest chamber of her heart. This was not the life she had been sent to live. It was the life she had built. It was her home. The proxy bride was gone. In her place was Seraphina Grayson, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, as if the world itself had been scrubbed clean. The little white church in Wildflower Springs was filled with a warm, dusty light and the quiet rustle of the community. For the first time, Sera did not feel like an outsider perched on the edge of a pew. She sat between Caelan and Lily, a solid unit, a family. The pastor, a kind-eyed man with a gentle voice, spoke not of fire and brimstone, but of grace, of unexpected blessings that arrive not in the form we pray for, but in the form we truly need. Pastor, voice echoing softly. And so we must be watchful, brothers and sisters. For the Lord's answer to our prayers may not be the easy path we envisioned, but the rocky road that forges a stronger spirit. It may not be the exact replacement for what we lost, but the new creation that makes us whole again. Lily, dressed in a simple yellow dress Sera had made for her, listened with an intensity far beyond her years. Her small hand rested trustingly on Sera's arm, her thumb absently stroking the fabric. She was not just hearing the words, she was absorbing them. The congregation begins to sing a final, gentle hymn, the sound of people standing, gathering their things. After the service, the community spilled out into the sunshine. The women who had once glanced at Sera with a mixture of pity and curiosity now greeted her with genuine warmth, asking after Caelan's leg, complimenting Lily's dress. Caelan stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, a quiet, proud smile on his face as he spoke with neighbors. The wall between the Grayson ranch and the town had finally crumbled. It was then that Lily gave a gentle tug on Sera's dress. Sera bent down, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Lily," her voice is clear, certain, without a trace of childish doubt. "I asked God for a new mama." Sera's breath caught. She smiled, a little sadly, ready to receive the gentle honesty of a child. She knew she could never replace the angel in the portrait. "Sera," Voice soft. I know, sweetheart. I know you wanted someone just like your first mama. And I'm different. Lily shakes her head vigorously, her eyes shining with a profound truth. No, you're strong. You fix things. You're not afraid of the dark, or the storm, or Papa's quiet. My first mama sang soft songs. You brave ones. Tears welled in Sera's eyes, blurring the face of the little girl before her. Lily, I wanted her to be the same. But God sent you after all, because you were exactly what we needed. The words hung in the air, simple, pure, and utterly transformative. They washed over Sera, healing the last, hidden wound of being second choice, the unwanted substitute. Caelan heard them too. He looked down at the two of them, his own eyes glistening. He didn't need to say a word. The look of absolute, grateful love on his face said everything. He put his arm around Sera and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head as Lily wrapped her arms around both of them. The happy chatter of the community fades into the background, replaced by the sound of a gentle breeze and birdsong. That evening, they stood together on their porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains in a spectacle of fiery orange and deep purple. The house behind them was no longer a shell of shadows. Lace curtains, sewn by Sera's hand, fluttered in the open windows. The scent of roses from her garden mingled with the smell of pine. From inside, the soft, persistent melody of the music box played. Caelan turned to Sera, taking both of her hands in his. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the strength, the patience, the love that had saved them all. Caelan, voice thick with emotion, but clear and sure. Seraphina, Hartwell Grayson, the wife I never knew to ask for. Will you stay? Not for a season, not out of duty, but forever? Tears streamed freely down Sera's face now, but they were tears of joy. She looked from his earnest, beloved face to Lily, who was grinning, her arms wrapped around her father's leg. She saw her past not as a loss, but as a journey that led her here. To this porch, to this man, to this child. Sera, her voice a whisper, but filled with the strength of a vow. I'm already home. As the last light of day faded, the three of them stood silhouetted against the blazing sky, their forms merging into one. The proxy bride had become the destined wife. The unwanted substitute had become the answered prayer. And the little girl's truth echoed into the twilight, a blessing for all their days to come. The sound of a contented sigh from Lily. The gentle hoot of an owl in the distance.